So welcome back, everybody. I'm very happy to have Curtis Rhodes here today to give us a talk on his compositional path. Please take it away.
Well, it's a great honor to be here at the University of the Arts Berlin, and I thank Alberto de Campo for his kind invitation to present this new lecture, a review of my compositional path. I've only given this once before, 2 days ago in Weimar, so it's a work in progress. This lecture traces my compositional path from the beginnings to the current moment. I comment on the works in the catalog, placing them within the biographical context of my artistic circumstances at the time. So I'm good. The lecture is, the text is somewhat longer than I want to present today, so I'm going to be skipping certain parts of it. But let's talk about my first encounters with electronic music. In 1970, at age 19, I was in a band, one of about 300 bands that I was in my teenage years, living in a commune with 25 people. I bought a vintage Hammond C3 organ and a Wurlitzer electric piano. I was growing artistically, going to concerts of classical music and also new music at the university. I was intrigued by the electronic music of Stockhausen and others. Several factors converged in a short period. I began working nights in the experimental music studio of the University of Illinois in collaboration with graduate student William Barnes. It was an advanced studio with a large Moog synthesizer, professional mixing console, quadraphonic sound, tape machines, and a mini computer. I met the computer music pioneers Herbert Brunn and James Beauchamp, both of whom were helpful and encouraging. I heard 16-channel spatialization controlled in real time by computer at Edward Coburn's studio. It was clear to me, and this was 1970, that computers would become the most powerful musical instrument of all, capable of generating any sound. I heard Ligeti's Volumina for pipe organ, a stunningly radical composition with an extraordinary graphical score. Volumina inspired me to become a composer. In 1971, I left the band, moved to Madison, Wisconsin, and entered into a period of informal study. I sold my Hammond organ to buy one of the first ARP synthesizers. I was hired as a studio synthesist at the Full Compass Studio in Madison, and I performed in numerous projects there, and I was paid studio time in exchange for my work there. So I made a demo reel of original compositions that I played all the instruments using multi-track tape techniques. At the University Music Library, I saw a poster for Xenakis' 1972 course on formalized music. This was a life-changing encounter. Following this, I formulated a research direction based on algorithmic composition and stochastic algorithms for granular synthesis of sound. I began to learn programming languages. The first was Fortran 4, in order to analyze Xenakis' stochastic music program. I created a flowchart based on this analysis. In August of 1972, I visited Stanford University in California. John Chowning gave me a personal tour of the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. It was a revelation. I saw advanced technology that was 10 years ahead of its time. I started attending California Institute of the Arts in Los Angeles as a student in music composition. CalArts had just opened, so everything was new and exciting. The faculty could not understand why I was interested in Xenakis' methods, but my fellow student composers did. I took classes with Mort Subotnik and the mathematician Leonard Cottrell. I was moving in an interdisciplinary direction, half of the time studying music and half studying mathematics and programming. I was working with the Buchla modular synthesizer, but also programming the Data General Nova computer. However, this computer was not configured to synthesize sound. Unlike my dearly departed colleague Clarence Barlow, who wrote a symphony in the style of Haydn at the age of 17, I did not have a rigorous classical music background from childhood. I took the required courses in harmony and serial techniques, but never saw my future as an orchestral composer. I was inspired by the more open sound world of electronic music. In 1973, I flew to Paris to attend the Festival d'Automne. The main goal of my visit was to experience Xenakis' sound and light spectacle, Polytope de Cluny, in the medieval Musée de Cluny. Polytope de Cluny was experienced lying on one's back, looking up. A robotically controlled laser projection system created moving geometric forms. High on the ceiling was a metal grid with hundreds of flashbulbs, also programmed by a digital script. Meanwhile, the intense octaphonic tape of Polytope de Cluny filled the hall. I experienced the Polytope 8 times. The design was extremely impressive, both technically and aesthetically. So let's take a look at a little documentary film on the Polytope de Cluny from that period. I'm going to skip ahead just to show a very short excerpt of what it looked like. So that gives you an idea. In Paris, I also attended lectures and concerts featuring Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. This included a disappointing performance of Hymnen for Orchestra conducted by Stockhausen himself. The contrast in direction between Xenakis and Stockhausen was starkly different, as time would tell. I'm going to skip over my student compositions and early works and move directly into the Tokyo Commission. So after this piece, Field, which I composed in 1981, I took a 10-year break from composition. Indeed, I did not complete a new composition until 1994, 13 years later. This was not a symptom of an artistic crisis. Simply put, in this period, 1981 to 1991, I had no time for concentrated effort on composition. I was working 2 jobs and in my spare time writing the computer music tutorial for the MIT Press, which was in itself a monumental effort. At the same time, I was producing compact discs for Computer Music Journal, Perspective to New Music, and the German record label Wergo. This involved working at Sound Mirror Studio in Boston with John Newton, who taught me a great deal about audiophile recording techniques. I bought a house near Boston and started building a personal studio. In 1988, I purchased my first computer, an Apple Macintosh II with a color display, together with the Studer Diaxis digital audio interface and the MacMix sound editing software, which could mix 50 tracks at a time. So I bought my first personal computer at the age of 37, which is very much in contrast to the situation today where 5-year-olds have computers. Having said that, I feel very lucky compared to someone like Varese, who didn't get access to electronic music until he was over 70 years old and only was able to complete 2 pieces. So I had my own software for granular and pulsar synthesis and compilers for the Music 4C and C-Sound synthesis languages. Unfortunately, it was still not possible to devote a sustained period of time to composition. While teaching at Oberlin in 1990, I was inspired by an exhibition of the photographic works of the Starn twins to imagine a new composition in 4 contrasting movements. This became Klang Tint. The title was inspired by the book Sound by the physicist John Tyndall. Tyndall coined the term Klang Tint as the English equivalent of the German word Klangfarbe for sound color. And I should say that John Tyndall is famous today as the discoverer of the greenhouse gas effect. In January 1991, I received a commission from the Japanese Ministry of Culture and the Kunitachi College of Music in Tokyo. I decided that realizing Klang Tint would be perfect for this purpose. Each movement of Klang Tint expressed a specific theme or metaphor. The metaphors were purity, filth, organic, robotic. So 2 opposing pairs, purity versus filth, organic versus robotic, providing a wide range of contrast. Each theme would express itself through a unique corpus of sound and through structures and processes unique to that movement. This work merged musical and technical research with composition itself. Among the research projects undertaken in the course of the composition were the following. 1, exploration of microtonal pitch organization, exploring the Bohlen-Pierce scale, which is a 13-tone scale that cycles at the tritav instead of the typical octave, the 3-to-1 ratio as opposed to the 2-to-1 ratio. Exploration of the continuum between harmony and timbre in the mixture of equal-tempered and microtonal scales. 2, editing on a microtime scale, microfiltration, transient wave writing, microspatialization, microvariations in phase and delay. This research was enabled by sound editors with graphical user interfaces, which had just become available. So in 1989, the first sound editors became available for personal computers where you could zoom in to the sample level and manipulate individual samples or short sequences of samples at the microtime scale. This was very new, and working on this level had not been explored before. 3, composition with granular synthesis, exploring musical applications of new sound materials such as clouds of sonic grains. In this period, there were only 2 composers using granular synthesis, Barry Truax in Canada and me. 4, composition with pulsar synthesis, realizing a new approach to sound particle synthesis. This involved software development and experimentation. And 5, new approaches to rhythmic structure, simultaneous polyrhythms, exploration of the continuum between synchronous and asynchronous rhythms, and exploration of Varèse's ideas of multiple asynchronous simultaneous rhythms with points of synchronization. So I wrote a text on Klangtint that's on my website that goes into these topics in more detail. There was a very broad palette of sound material that went into the piece, and the work took place in 2 residencies in Tokyo in 1991 and 1994. And in the first residency, I recorded a number of instruments in their musical instrument museum. The first movement, Purity, is based on the Bohlen-Pierce scale and was completed in Paris prior to my arrival in Tokyo in 1994. For the second residency, I presented a lecture and the premiere of 3 movements of Klangtint at the Kunitachi School. One of the goals of Klangtint was to demonstrate that a heterogeneous sound palette can be integrated into a coherent compositional structure through the organization of phrase structures and musical narrative. This was an important lesson for me, and a style emerged from this process that would echo in my later works. And indeed, this is really the foundation of my current, of the style from all of my work since the 1990s. I would say the middle period of my compositional career was from 1995 to 2003. I call it the microsound period. In 1995, I was teaching in Paris at Les Ateliers UdK, associated with Xenakis. John Alexander, a student, and I coded a program in C for teaching granular synthesis called Cloud Generator. I coded the sound engine, and he coded the graphical interface. I thought of granular synthesis as a fascinating phenomenon with untapped musical potential. But I did not have, in this period, a clear vision of how to compose with granular materials. That year, I started teaching at the University of Paris 8, invited by Horacio Vaggione. One day, Professor Vaggione pulled me aside and said that granular synthesis was important, and I should write a doctoral thesis on this topic. This was a wake-up call. I took on this project, which required 4 years of experiments and writing to deliver the required 400-page document. Meanwhile, in 1996, I was invited to the faculty in Santa Barbara, and I knew that Horacio Vaggione's Châle from 1994 was a landmark when I first heard it in Bourges, France. Châle is composed using microsound particles derived from a piano that are projected on various timescales. And then in 1997, Ken Fields, a UCSB graduate student, played me his Life in the Universe, an intriguing combination of granulated voice mixed with distant sinusoidal textures. It became clear to me that I could combine techniques of phrase construction developed in Klangtint, which already used pulsar synthesis, with granulation processes. So 24 years After my initial experiments with granular synthesis, I finally had a clear idea of how to proceed. At the same time, I was continuing to develop pulsar synthesis. My first experiments began in 1991. I immediately recognized the importance of this technique, which generates the sound of filtered impulses, which is central to the sound of the analog onioline and electronium instruments, as well as being the center of Stockhausen's Contacte, a work that I greatly admire. Alberto de Campo came to UCSB in 1997 as a visiting researcher, and in 1999 we appointed him to the position of research director of CREATE at UCSB, the Center for Research in Electronic Art Technology. Alberto collaborated with me to produce the pulsar generator app shown here and the CreativeVox synthesizer, which could generate both granular sounds and pulsar sounds. Half-Life, a composition that I produced in this period, combined pulsar and granular synthesis and was a major breakthrough. It was in this piece that I developed the idea of multiscale planning in the presence of sound. The piece began as an improvisation with pulsar synthesis and granulation. I then assembled phrase structures from the ordering and layering of the individual sound objects, which is a bottom-up strategy. So I'm taking different sound objects and combining them into phrases. When I sensed the possibility of a large-scale structure emerging, I would change direction, working from the top down in order to bring together these chunks to create some kind of a macro form. But often I would find a situation where some of the chunks went together, but there were gaps between them, so I'd have to return to the low level again and compose new material to connect these larger phrase structures. So I'm working both from the top and the bottom. This is what I call the multiscale approach, and working very freely, switching strategies depending on the circumstances. On top of this, at any point in the work, I might simply sprinkle generated particles like salt and pepper to spice up the sauce. Thus, multiscale planning means that decisions and actions can occur on any time scale. So I'd like to play the first sound example of this piece, Half-Life from 1998. So the first movement, Half-Life appeared on the double CD album CC Mix, New Electroacoustic Music from Paris, on the Mode label, which won the Heartbeat Award, the French Grammy from the Charles Cros Academy, and was named 5 Best of 2001 by the Wire magazine. It later appeared on my album Point Line Cloud, which was reissued in 2019 by Presto Records in Milan. 10th vortex and 11th vortex. Notice the durations of these pieces, 3 and 4 minutes, and this is going to be typical of this whole microsound period. The pieces are very short. On the night of 20 October 2000, I performed 11 sound cloud vortices. These consisted of real-time granulations of a single sound file, a train of electronic impulses emitted by pulsar generator. So both Half-Life and these pieces were pulsar synthesis granulated. Granulation decomposes a given sound into a cloud of thousands of sound particles. This operation can also change the time support of the original extending it, in this case, by a factor of 6. In addition, each sound grain passes through its own filter. Each grain passes through its own filter. So this is what I call per grain processing. And each grain is scattered to its own random place in space. So again, per grain spatialization. Thus, each grain has a unique identity. It is this swirling combination of thousands of individual grains that make up the vortex. I chose the 10th and 11th vortices for further treatment. I'll just play a short example of the 10th vortex, which came together very quickly. So the goal in 10th vortex was to create this continuous texture that creates the illusion that I created it in real time when in fact it was assembled over a period of 2 months. 11th vortex has a more idiosyncratic structure, broken into 80 fragments and took several months to put together. And here I'll just play an excerpt of 11th vortex. Pulsar synthesis. Beginning to be granulated. Sculptor, 3 minutes, 13 seconds. The source material for Sculptor 2001 was a percussion track by the group Tortoise, sent to me for processing in August 2000 by John McIntyre, my former student at Oberlin. I granulated and filtered the material by means of my constant Q granulator, which disintegrated the beating drums into a torrent of sound particles scattered across the stereo field. Beginning with this turbulent sound mass, I articulated the internal morphologies and implied causalities within the current of particles. This meant shaping the river of particle densities, squeezing and stretching the amplitudes of individual particles and clouds, carving disconnected and connected frequency zones, and twisting the spatial flow. Over months of intermedia editing on different timescales, I was able to sculpt this material into its final form. It was premiered at a festival in Porto in 2001. So the sound is from John McIntyre, the drummer of the group Tortoise. So everything you hear is the sound of granulated drums. You can hear cymbals, tom-toms, bass. Fluxon. Fluxon is an exploration of elastic and liquid sound morphologies and continuous transformations. At the family home in Illinois, I recorded the sound of marbles rolling on one of my old toys. This sound was the primary source for this piece. The sound was processed by our constant Q granular program, which applies a unique bandpass filter to each grain. At this point, I had developed a high degree of control over granular processes. Fluxon came together quickly. I began experimenting in October 2002 with a view to creating fluid morphologies that undergo torsional or twisting forms. Specific to this piece are operations that twist the sound in phase, frequency, spectrum, and pitch. These torsional forces bend and scatter the stream of particles flowing at high velocity through this brief, concentrated piece. Fluxon was premiered in 2003 at All Tomorrow's Parties, UK, curated by Autechre, and released on the Point Line Cloud album in 2005. Voltaire, in 4 parts, longer piece because it's 4 parts. In this age of fundamentalist religious fervor, it seemed appropriate to evoke the wry, level-headed spirit of Voltaire in the title of this electronic work. The sound material derives from granular synthesis experiments. Over a number of years, I transformed and edited this material in detail, a process of micromontage. So let me just play through various processes of transformation, the material separated into 4 parts, each with a unique logic. The final result is the final piece is the result of countless manual gestures applied like brushstrokes to the canvas of time. So here's an excerpt of Voltaire Part 1. The premiere of Voltaire Part 1 was unusual. I was invited to open for the British electronic duo UdK at the El Rey Theater in Los Angeles in May 2001. Only the first part of Voltaire was ready, but I had other material. My video artist, Brian O'Reilly, and I arrived at the theater at 15 o'clock for the sound check. The performance began at 22 o'clock. There was already a line of several hundred people for the sold-out show. At the sound check, the engineer of the El Rey's powerful sound system asked me for my loudest sound. I played it. 95 dB, he yelled. That's our minimum. Backstage, we met Sean and Rob and gave them our software. We must not have made too bad an impression, as we were invited by UdK to perform at Altamara's parties in April 2003. Pictor Alpha unfolds as a process of theme and variations. This is a pure pulsar synthesis piece. As a repeating melodic and rhythmic motive passes through transpositions, permutations, interjections, and timbral transformations. So it's edited on a micro-time scale, which we call micromontage. Here is an excerpt of Pulsar Alpha, Pictor Alpha. Nanomorphosis, 3 minutes, 16 seconds. Nanomorphosis explores the changes in state in a stream of sound particles. The stream is an evanescence that is always renewing itself. By manipulation of various sound synthesis processes, I was able to make the particles sound at times like the scattering of hard pellets, or a flowing or bubbling liquid, or an evaporating cloud of steam. I would sometimes mark transitions by inserting a barrier particle, a kind of punctuation mark, into the flow. At transition points, one can hear particles ricochet off a barrier, while at the same time, the ongoing stream changes character. This ricochet technique is a characteristic of nanomorphosis. So let me just play an excerpt. Oh, that's not right. So this was premiered at the Paris Planetarium in November of 2003. Now began by applying our constant Q granulator, which applies a unique bandpass filter at each grain to regranulate my previous composition, Voltaire Part 3. So this is an example of higher order granulation, where I take a piece that I've already made and granulate it. You'll see this is a technique that I used in another piece that I'll discuss in a moment. It presents the illusory impression that it was spun continuously in one studio session. While it is based on a continuous granulation much longer than the final piece, it was stitched together out of many disjoint parts that I spliced and layered in order to suggest a continuous process. So let's hear an example of now. So it's a piece characterized by various collisions and the aftermath of those collisions. I would say another period of my work started in 2009 and extended to 2021. This is what I call the late middle period works, beginning with Touche in two parts, lasting 5 minutes, 33 seconds, dedicated to Morton Subotnick, my teacher at CalArts. In April 2008, I was experimenting with our granulation program, Emission Control, processing a brief sound file consisting of 21 impulses. I noticed that its opening looping sonic texture was reminiscent of the classic electronic work Touche, 1969, by my former teacher, Morton Subotnick. I know this work very well, having produced and remastered it in 1986 for the Wergo label. In homage, I decided to dedicate this work, whose French title means Touch Not, to Morton Subotnick. The title proved apt, for after months of work, Touche Pas sounds nothing like Touche. The work was premiered in a special Create concert, which also featured John Chowning, Max Matthews, and Jean-Claude Risset, who were present. Brian O'Reilly made an excellent video for the DVD version on the Flickertone Pulse album by Presto Records in Milan. So let's hear Touche Pas excerpt. So we have this idea of cadences. Cadence. Cadence. Usually reverb with some harmonic. Cadence with a harmonic component. And that's the structure of the piece, goes through that. Many cadences with these reverberant harmonic components. Never in 3 parts, never, never, never again, and never more. 2010, 7 minutes, 30 seconds. Piece in 3 parts. It's a sequel to my composition Now, and it is a result of third-order granulation, being a regranulation of Now, which was, as I explained before, a regranulation of Voltaire Part 3. So I'm taking a third-order regranulation process, but this was merely a starting point for composition. I then edited the granular textures over a long period to make the finished work. So here is the beginning of Never Part 1. Epicurus, 3 minutes and 8 seconds, dedicated to the Greek sage, is the fruit of a long journey beginning in Paris with pulse synthesis techniques in 1995. 3 months later, I processed these recordings by means of analog tape echo feedback and digital granulation. These operations resulted in a large database of sound material, hundreds of disparate fragments making up hours of sound. Assembling Epicurus was like solving a very complicated puzzle, but I'm very pleased with the final form, which includes an opening and a fast section, a slow section, and a grand finale, all concentrated in 3 minutes and 6 seconds. The piece premiered at the Supersymmetry Festival in Barcelona in 2011 and at the Red Cat Theater in Disney Hall 2 months later. So it's all the echoing sounds, echoing at different speeds. And that's from this process of analog tape echo feedback. I have a Studer analog tape recorder. I take the output of the tape recorder, route it into a mixer, and then back into itself, so with a delay. And then I have a varispeed control on the tape recorder. I can speed it up or slow it down continuously to create faster or slower echoes. And when the feedback is set to a certain level, the whole system starts to go into independent oscillation, and you don't need any more input. It just becomes this shimmering sound cloud. And it's the main characteristic of the work Contacto by Stockhausen, and nobody used it after that. So I decided I'll use it. And you'll see there's a piece coming up here that is almost totally based on tape echo feedback. It's a central part of my technique today. Always, the sound world of the mid-century modern electronic music is a reference point for me. As a child, experimenting with my father's tape recorders, I was fascinated by the charm of sounds played fast, slow, and especially backwards. As a student composer, I was drawn to the otherworldly allure of tones submerged in plate reverberation made in studios long ago and far away. Cologne, Milan, Paris in the 1950s and the 1960s. I brought this listening to the composition of Always, so I'll just play an example of that. Again, this is another piece based on a regranulation of a higher order. Still Life is a very different piece from all of my other pieces. It's dedicated in memory of Stefan Kaska, a composer I knew who died at the age of 23, and it's based on sound material created by him in the 1980s. After coming to work at the MIT Experimental Music Studio one morning in the summer of '82, I met Stefan Kaska. He was crumpled on the tile floor of the studio, asleep after an all-night computing session. He was a student in the summer course in computer music. I was a researcher at MIT Experimental Music Studio and editor of Computer Music Journal for the MIT Press. I quickly discovered that Stefan was a gifted pianist and composer, and we became friends. After the summer course was over, he returned to his native Munich. However, his fascination with computer music soon led him back to Cambridge. He took a job as a sound designer for a game company so he could work on his own music using their computer. It was in this concentrated period that he created most of the sound material of Still Life. Several months later, in July 1985, on a holiday with his girlfriend in Spain, Stefan was killed in an automobile accident. He was 23 years old. After his death, I started a project to make a new piece from this material. I requested the original analog tapes of his piece, Movement in a Still Life, from the Kaska family. Unfortunately, it was not possible for me to commence work immediately on this project due to other obligations, and years passed. The source material was individual sounds, so the task remained of putting these sounds together into some kind of a composition. All I knew is that he intended to layer the sounds on an 8-track tape recorder. So I added a bunch of new sounds. Coming back to the work in 2011, I began to really concentrate on the piece, and in April 2015, with a view of completing the project, I assembled the original material sequenced by me, serving as a foundation for new material, which I began to add, and the new and the old exchange roles continuously as foreground and background. So here I'll play an excerpt of Still Life, and it's mainly characterized by noise sounds and FM sounds, which were very typical of the computer music sound palette of 1982. then. So then was my, I set a goal here of I wanted to make a longer composition. This is 16 minutes, 28 seconds, and it's based on this technique of tape echo feedback, which can often produce these very long, continuous textures of continuous feedback, shimmering feedback that can be shifted up and down in frequency by changing the tape speed or by equalization, by making only the high frequencies feedback or only the low frequencies feedback. And I wanted to express this idea of Edgard Varèse of when sound masses occur, there'll be shifting planes, and when they collide, the phenomena of penetration or repulsion will seem to occur. He wrote about this in 1924. So this is based, again, on tape echo feedback analog with a Studer tape recorder. Feedback is inherently unstable. Many of the sound phenomena that occur are unpredictable. And in particular, the material recorded at low level revealed remarkable nonlinear effects when they were later boosted in amplitude. The focus of then is contrast between continuous undulations and discrete pulses. I've never before assembled a piece entirely out of such materials, so I had to approach this piece with a beginner's mind. So here is excerpt of then. Tape echo feedback. The shh. Echoing. Speeding up, slowing down. So this is an early version premiered at the International Computer Music Conference in Athens. Important aspect of this is multiscale mixing. So this piece was made over a period of years. I downmix, so I only work with 8 tracks at a time. I use Pro Tools, and I usually will have a stereo stem, which is my previous submix, at the top level, and then it will add 6 more stereo tracks or 12 more mono tracks, depending on the configuration. But the point is 8 stereo tracks is going to be the result, and I'll mix those 8 tracks. And that's a divide and conquer strategy, because I'm going to do that another 500 times in this piece. So ultimately, there were at least 2,100 tracks mixed together. It would have been insane to try to do that all at once. It would have been insane to try to do 50 tracks at a time. 8 tracks is all I could handle, and I mix that down to what's called a stem, and then import the stem and start layering on top of that. Submix again, import the stem, layer on top of that, submix again, layer that, and do that 500 times. And that's how this piece was put together. Modulude is dedicated to John Chowning. It's based on modulation, amplitude and frequency modulation, ring modulation, single sideband modulation. So let's hear Modulude. So the final piece I'm going to present today is Bubble Chamber, another piece composed over a very long period of time. I've long been inspired by the beauty of images produced by a bubble chamber, a device for photographing subatomic particles. These images show intricate interactions as particles enter a chamber at extremely high speed, leading to collisions in which some particles break apart or spin off in strange directions. These interactions serve as metaphors for musical processes. Bubble chamber focuses on the interaction of sound particles with noises and tones. In this work, a collision between sounds often terminates a phrase. The result is a cadence that resonates with the deep energy of the collision. Some compositions come together relatively easily, while others require a struggle. Bubble chamber falls into the latter category. Work on this piece began in January 1997, and I completed the final mix in 2018. Much of the material was produced by extracting bits of already existing material and transforming it. Many of the sounds are the result of particle replications. As a result, bubble chamber is replete with internal repetition, and if you were to see the mix, you would see all this repetition. So that is a snapshot of my work to the present day. I'm actively working on other pieces, but that's my review of my compositional path. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. I think we have time for just a couple of questions. Brian, maybe you want to come up here? So you could ask a question of either Brian or me. I don't want to go too long because we have a concert to prepare for, but yes.
Oh, you want another mic.
Thanks for the presentation. My question is, you were mentioning some collaborations with some bands that produce music in more contemporary electronic music context, or one student of yours, the member of Tortoise. I wonder what is your approach when this kind of collaboration comes to you? Does it something that make you more creative, that because it's more out of academical context, or it's included in your practice, or it's something that open your compositional or musical imagery or so?
I'm a solo artist. I remember once I was in therapy, and the therapy was trying to get me more socialized, and he said, "Why don't you, work with other, musicians?" And I said, "Well, does a painter work with other painters? I don't think so. I work in my studio." So sometimes when someone like John McIntyre of Tortoise sent me sound material to manipulate, I was happy to do that. But then I did my own process, and it's similar. The collaboration that Brian and I have, I make the piece completely. It's finished. Then I hand it to Brian, and he does something great with it, and I trust his judgment. So there isn't any. It's a kind of collaboration with a lot of trust and just giving over the entire work to him to do something with it. Yes?
And about trusting your judgment, when is the composition finished?
Well, it's
We saw some certain examples, but that it wasn't even finished for the presentation for the premiere.
Well, a composition is finished when I have nothing more to add or subtract.
Thank you.
How do you know when that is the case?
I know when I have nothing more to add and subtract.
Hi, hello.
Oh, that mic doesn't work.
Oh, yeah. Hello, this can be a question for both of you.
Yes.
Looking at both of your work, sometimes when composing we think of foreground and background, and in both your works I think that those concepts are they blur, the background become foreground, and I was wondering, do you think in those terms when you make music or video, or is it just something you don't think about?
No, I'm very conscious of foreground and background and how one becomes the other. I think it's not new to electronic music. That's the history of music is foreground and background. I mean, Beethoven worked with foreground and background coming together, and Brian works with layers. So there's always stuff in the background, and all of a sudden it pops out.
I have middle ground, though. I don't just say I have foreground, middle ground, and background. I have another layer in between there. But yeah, musically and visually, it's something that you're always playing with. Being a double bass player, I really hate being in the background all the time, to be honest. So, I have techniques when I'm playing there that I can come into the foreground and so on and so forth. But then sometimes, structurally, that's where you belong, in the background. So some elements can move through it, but they also sometimes have a role to play within the greater context of the composition.
So maybe I have time for one more question? Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. I was wondering, so you just told us that you're a solo artist, you spend a lot of time in your studio, and I was impressed by the sound of some of the compositions, all the compositions you showed us, and I was wondering, your tools of the trade have probably changed throughout the decades, but there's a certain consistency that I hear in the way you implement granulation. Of course, your whole work is associated very much with granulation. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit how your tools, your software have changed throughout the decades, and how that fed back into your practice, and if you notice that somehow something changed in the way you approach for example, granulation or sculpting sounds in various ways?
Well, honestly, not very much has changed, because I have my own granulation tools. I have my own programs. Some of them run on old computers. I have my old pulsar generator, thanks to Alberto De Campo. I have a special computer devoted to that, so I'm always going to use that. I've been using Pro Tools since it was invented. I have my tape echo feedback system. I've been working with that for many years. I use a multitude of different reverberator plugins. But really, my toolkit has not changed terribly much.
It's like you protected your chosen tools, and they're there for you. And
Yeah, I mean, the French composers in the acousmatic school, they would always refer to sa petite cuisine, your little kitchen. And I have my little kitchen, my little tools, and I make my little pieces.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you tonight.